So we went to school to confirm the history we were taught. We didn't go to school to learn history. We went to school to confirm the history we were taught. So when the teacher or the lecturer began to lie, I tell him, oh guy, you are lying, you know. Okay, listen, pay attention, Africa. Pay attention, Akebolani. Let us talk about the long-awaited topic. The textbook, historical textbook that was published in Nigeria to be used students in the junior secondary school level. That a particular tribe was excluded from the historical books. You see, I have this book up to 700 in my DM. So many people saying, "Thank Cry, the voice of Akebulan, talk about it." That is your field. Please talk about this, Thank Cry, the voice of Akebulan. And I brought out the topic yesterday. I said, should we talk about it? They say, yes, talk about it. Pay attention, Africa. You see, for those who are not Nigerians, because in this modern day Tankwaya family, we have different people from different parts of Akebulan in this family. Okay, let me explain before we go into details so you can understand. This book, for a long time, history was intentionally removed from the academic curriculum in Nigeria, and then history was reintroduced. But then they found out that a particular tribe was not discussed in that historical book, and that has been a problem. Do you understand? Why is this topic important? This topic is important because history is not opinion. History is not a story. History is not a cock and bull story. History is not assumption. History is not presumption. History is an academic discipline with rules, stages, and categories. Pay attention. You see, Nigeria is a plural, multi-ethnic, and multi-historical society. When you are talking about Nigerian history, you must be very careful. Very, very careful. Hence, you might fall into a trap. You must be very careful. Nigeria is a complex society. But mind you, that complexity does not mean weakness. That complexity simply means reality. What is the reality? The reality is that you must look into everyone before you write about the Nigerian history. Pay attention. When I got this information to talk about this, the first thing I asked, was this book approved? Then the person said, my child came back from school with this book. The school gave it to him. They have been using it. Listen, why did I ask? Before a book can be adopted to be used by teachers as a working material to impart the younger generation, that book must pass through stages. Number one, it must pass through academic review. If it is history book, it must pass through historical verification. It must pass through checks and balance. Do you understand? It must pass through national interest assessment. These are the stages before the book will now be adopted as a working material to use to impart the younger generation. Because history is important. Any nation that plays with history, that nation is playing with its future and itself. That's why this topic is important. Now, in my comment section, someone brought this up. The person said you cannot blame them for removing the Igbos from that book. Why? Because you can't talk about the Igbo history without talking about Nigeria. And you can't talk about the Igbo Nigeria history without talking about the Biafra Nigeria civil war. I said, no, you are wrong. You are very, very wrong. Let me teach you. You see, there's a difference between simplifying history and erasing history. You can simplify a historical topic. You can delay a historical topic, but you cannot remove a people from an academic national curriculum. You can't. You can't do that. When you intentionally remove a particular ethnic group while discussing historical information, that book ceases from being an academic material to becoming an ideology. And that is not a pedagogy. That becomes a distortion. Listen, history is not mathematics. In mathematics, you can use different formula and arrive at the same answer. Still mathematics, still correct. History is not English, where you can use different synonyms and antonyms and still get the same thing you are looking for. In history, if it is not white, it is not white. If it is not black, it is not black. And being a historical teacher or a historical writer, you must be careful because your work is the work of a spirit. Why? You are not just writing. You are representing people who once existed. So when you lie or distort that history, you are lying against people that you don't see. They can hit you. You can go with a swollen stomach because that is a purported lie. And let me tell you something. If you are writing a historical book and you intentionally exempt a particular tribe, you are not doing them. You are actually doing yourself. Because if you are a good historical aficionado, you will find out that even your own history is incomplete without including the history of your neighbor, no matter how you try to downplay them. Do you understand? And for this lady who say you can't teach the Igbos and Nigeria history without talking about the Civil War, let me teach you. Listen, remember what I told you, that history is a what? Is an academic discipline with different stages and categories. You don't start teaching a child in just one about the Nigerian Civil War. No. History has stages. So you don't fill their mind with what they're not supposed to know yet. It is from senior secondary school you start teaching them that type of history. Why? Because history has stages. First, when you want to start teaching the young mind history, you start with early settlements. That is early societies. And then you start teaching them cultural formation, political structures, colonial or expansionist movement. Do you understand? When you start teaching them the early cultural settlement, the early societies, teach them how those people formed, cultural formation, political structures, and then you start teaching them colonial periods or expansionist periods. Because history has different categories and different types, which every man can fit into. So you can make excuse for them. Why? Because you have political history, social history, cultural history, economic history, colonial history, pre-colonial history, and post-colonial history. If I happen to be a writer who wants to write for the Nigerian society, for students in that level, and I want to write, let me say I want to write for the Igbos, I can just start writing the Igbo pre-colonial societies. That is talking about what? The pre-colonial history. I can start talking about the Igbo social organizations. That is me talking from what? Social history. I can talk about the Igbo trade networks. That is talking about economic history. I can talk about the Igbo intellectual tradition. That is talking about cultural history. I have not talked about the Civil War while talking about these things. Why? You must understand that while talking about history or writing about history, there are certain elements that must come into perspective and into play. What is that? One is that which you are writing must be accurate. Accurate. That is number one. Number two is that it must be complete. It must be complete. Number three is that you must be patient. Patient. That is your quality that a historical writer must have, so you can have the time to take details into perspective. Number four is that there must be balance and checks. Number five is that there must be inclusion. There must be inclusion. Once you miss one step, you have missed it all. Now, this book missed what? It missed accuracy. And because it is not accurate, it lacks inclusion. Because right now, the Igbos in Nigeria are feeling that they are not being included in that historical perspective. And because they're not included, you don't need anyone to tell you that the writers lack patience, that the writing lacks checks and balance. There is no inclusion. And that is not a way for a fragile nation like Nigeria to survive. Because you are giving them a perspective that they are not part of you. And then some people say, what do you expect? It is the Yoruba man that wrote it. No, you must refrain from that. If you are a member of this family, why we attack individuals based on what they do and not their nation? That is the new Akebulan we are building. An Akebulan that talks to an individual based on the product of the thought of that individual, not based on where that individual comes from. What those writers of that book did does not reflect the general viewpoint of the Yoruba nation. You must understand that. You must. They obviously missed it because Nigeria is a plural society. When you want to talk about Nigerian society, you must talk about the major ethnic groups. And when we talk about major ethnic groups, you must come to terms to understand that major do not equate importance. That we say major ethnic group do not mean that they are the most important ethnic groups. Now, because you are looking at the size of the book, so that what you are teaching these students do not lead to information overload. So what do we say? You talk about these ones that we consider to be the major ethnic groups, and then you introduce other ethnic groups and teach. When you miss these things, what you are teaching is incomplete and what a misconception. That means you are carefully and intentionally distorting narrative. That is not the right way to do. Do you think you are the only one that have a kind of history that you are not proud of? Because I know that a whole lot of you are not proud of what happened in the Nigerian Biafra Civil War. I know. But you are not the only one that have that kind of history. Let's talk about South Africa. South Africa. They don't just teach children about apartheid. No. What do they do? You teach pre-colonial African societies to children, and then you introduce social African organizations, and then later in the senior secondary school, you introduce apartheid regime. The fact that apartheid regime is a ugly history of South Africa does not mean it cannot be taught. Because we say justice delayed is justice denied in history. History removed is history denied. Talk about America. In America, I suggest that we want to teach history to American students. What do? You have to first teach them about the Native Americans. And then you teach the early colonial settlers. That's when you introduce Christopher Columbus and what they did. And then you come down and teach the political foundations of formation. And then when they get to 13 to 17 years, you start teaching them about the indigenous Americans, African Americans, immigrant communities. You don't remove a part of history because you think, it's going to be very rigid. No, you don't. It's not an excuse to remove a particular ethnic group from historical documentation. It's not enough. Everybody must be included. That is you embracing them. That is you showing them they are part of you. You don't tell lies when you're writing history. Because the people who you are denying their right to be expressed are watching you. They are watching you from the world beyond. You must be very careful. History is not mathematics, it's not English. History is a real life event. I'm telling you that somebody will not come in your sleep and slap you. Be very careful when you teach history. Do you understand? Take it different stages. I told you, you can start teaching them for where? Early societies. You can start teaching them from cultural formation, political structures, colonial or expansionist period, because you have different kind of history. Political history, social history, economic history, cultural history, pre-colonial history, colonial history, and post-colonial history. You have no excuse. Please, that book should not be used. When you say that book should not be used, you are not doing the Igbos in your nation a favor. You are doing yourself a favor. Because take for instance, someone from Zimbabwe come to your country and take that book and go home and read it. He will not see the Igbos in it. He will not even know that you have such a people in your nation. You must be careful when you teach children. Children do not know what is removed. Children only know what they are being shown. Be careful. Be careful. The Ministry of Education in Nigeria, please and please, when it has to do with history, be careful. Because what happened in historical class can affect the national harmony. Be careful. I love you and I care about you. You know, people like us are privileged. We were not taught history in school. We learned history at home. Under the shade and the influence of the Iroko tree, when the moon is roaming, we all sat down under the influence and the cover of our ancestors. And the oldest man in the village calls the child who he wants to pass on the historical knowledge and say, hey, Tankraya, you are the next that will teach the world about history. And they start teaching you oral history, oral history. The person is telling you, you are looking, you are watching, you are taking account. So we went to school to confirm the history we were taught. We didn't go to school to learn history. We went to school to confirm the history we were taught. So when the teacher or the lecturer began to lie, I tell him, oh God, you are lying, you know. Because before you start saying it, I know it already. So this also calls for parental tutor. Teach your children about yourself before they go to school. Do you understand? But history must be accurate. It must be accurate. It must be complete. The African proverb said, he will go and listen to one side of a story and draws conclusion is capable of committing murder. You are allowing that children to draw conclusion for one side of a story. No. Give the children latitude. Don't be scared. Don't hide anything. Teach them. Let them learn. Let them learn. It's just like in journalism. As a journalist, you are not allowed to report anything without fairness and balance, without fair hearing. That is equity. Please, such a thing should not happen. And please refrain from always blaming different ethnic groups. Reason. Any human being that cannot reason beyond ethnicity, beyond negative ethnicity, you are a problem to humanity. You are a problem to humanity and a liability to mankind. Please, refrain. I love you, Nigerians. I love you, Africans. Modern day thank cry I care about you. And I'm saying, please, let there have and let there be another historical book that is all encompassing about the Nigerian historical perspective so that everyone will be happy. Because history removed is history denied. Africa, wisdom is the principal thing. My class on how to be a good teacher starts tomorrow. Make sure you get enrolled so you don't miss it. I'll be teaching you how to be a good teacher, because there's a difference between being a good teacher in the classroom, a good teacher on social media. There's a difference, and I'll teach you how to use social media for global influence. I love you and I care about you, Africa. Love one another. Love one another. Love one another. Love makes the world go round. Africa, Akambulan, wisdom is the principal thing.